So I work within digital advertising. I was asked to help with a pitch for Spotify UK, and within that time noticed how en masse listening was shifting. So it come from this background of like listening to field recordings and like really strange stuff, and then my colleagues were starting to listen to these field recordings dressed up as other things, as beautiful playlists on Spotify. I wasn't involved in listening data, but I was involved in what people were talking about on the platform and the things that we were asked to promote. And it suddenly shifted from like pop playlists and the focus was entirely on like Ed Sheeran or whatever, and now we've got people in their offices listening to melting ice. And I just thought that was really far out and fantastic. And so I guess somewhere in that crazy state of change, I saw this possibility of I've always used sound to self-soothe, and millions of people are using sound to self-soothe. What is it that we're all doing, and why does sound appear to be transformational?
It's not even just comfort, because that sounds quite passive. We can repair ourselves through music.
Are our listening habits changing? What effects can sounds like drone and sine tones have on us physically and emotionally? Can we imagine a future in which we might receive sound prescription? Why does music played badly make us laugh? What of the mythical brown note? And does beetroot really taste better if serenaded with sound? Sitting comfortably? Seatbelts on? We're off on another adventure in Nutopia. With me, David Brownwell. This podcast is sponsored by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. No, really. I've been obsessed with sound and making music since I was little. There was always a piano in the house, and when I was 12, I bought a tiny synthesizer, began writing music, and never stopped. Although never made explicit, most of the music for this series, this episode being the exception, was created by Oddfellows Casino, whose name I've been performing and recording under since 2001. The music I make seems to draw out a more melancholic side of my personality. People often describe it as having a plaintive quality. If I don't make music for a period of time, I get twitchy. It needs to come out, express itself. There's something therapeutic for me about making music, as well as listening to it, and I know I'm far from alone in this. What you're hearing now is a piece written especially for this episode, playing around with drones, samples and gongs. 30 years ago, when I first bought a Walkman and a set of headphones, I listened exclusively to recorded music. Nowadays, alongside audiobooks and podcasts and all my precious albums, from Alice Coltrane to Robert Wyatt, if I've got my headphones on, I could also be listening to minimalist drones, Tibetan bowls, white noise, ASMR, sound meditations or birdsong, often deliberately chosen to alter my mood, or if struggling with insomnia, to relax and hopefully send me to sleep. Slowly but surely, for many of us, our listening habits are becoming more nuanced towards activating particular feelings or states of mind. Over the next hour, immersed in the hypnotic sounds of some of our musical guests, we'll dig into the nature of drone with author Harry Sword, learn about the physical effects of sound on the body with scientist Fiona Miller, investigate whether specific frequencies and sine waves can be used as medicine for humans and plants with Colombian artist David Velez, and we'll end with the mythic search for the brown note and hear music so intentionally bad it makes for perfect laughter therapy. But why don't we start at the very beginning? What of our ancestors' relationship to sound? I first came across Paul Devereux in the early noughties and have read his books and followed his work with interest ever since. His passions include ancients and traditional cultures, sacred sites and psychedelics, but he's perhaps best known for his exploration into archaeoacoustics, the study of sound at archaeological or ancient sites. In his book Stone Age Soundtracks, Paul writes, "Where we talk of seeing as believing, for other cultures it would have been hearing. Acoustic archaeology is about healing our research deafness."
We are geared to sound in terms of rhythm, ritual. Sometimes sort of drumming sounds can drive the activity of the brain, put people into trance. One of the things I've been interested in is actually the sound that people would have heard way back when, thousands of years ago. And we do that by checking the sound of the rocks themselves. If you hit certain rocks, they will ring or make a musical sound. And we know this was the case back in the Paleolithic, where people who would have been using or frequenting the caves that have got paintings on the wall, the stalactites will ring, sometimes sound like a harp. And we know from forensic study of these features, there's little marks where they've been hit many times over however many generations. Sound has always been relevant. And of course, what people have found, archaeologists have found, are bird bone flutes. So we know way back at the beginning of any recording of prehistory that we have, people were using sound, and we can actually hear those sounds again. The actual stones of a given structure can sometimes ring, and we can see that these have been used. Enclosed spaces like Neolithic chambers, we've done work where we check the resonant frequency, that is the first full sound waves you can get in such a place. A team from Oxford, Cambridge, and an Indian university did work on a particular ridge in India that had rock marking carvings on it. And they were approached by local people while they were up there tabulating all this. They said, "Do you know the rocks make music?" And they started hitting the stones, and they rang. Now, about 2,000 years after that, because they were Neolithic carvings, some of the temples in India started putting up pillars, ornate carved things that also rang. There was actually a technology of ringing rocks. And some of them are completely graduated and relate to some of the basic notes in classical Indian music. So throughout human history, really, rocks that make intriguing sounds, maybe the sound of the spirits. So it's a deep musical, acoustic core to human experience, expressed through the natural rocks.
One area Paul has worked in is Carmennin in Wales, where he took students to explore the sonic qualities of the rocks. This is the place where the blue stones, the inner ring at Stonehenge, came from, leading to speculation that the mammoth journey for those Welsh rocks was owing to their sonorous qualities.
We knew that that area had a history or a rumour of the rocks being musical themselves. We literally knocked on rock. We tapped on hundreds of rocks in swathes across the ridge and saw what the incidence level of rocks that resonated, rang. They could sound like church bells, and in fact were used instead of church bells in one place in the Preseli. On the Carmennin Ridge there is a stone marking actually what is now a dried up spring. That was probably a sacred spring. It's now fallen over, and there are indentations in it. So whoever made those indentations would have had to have known that this rock rang.
I asked Paul to speculate on the nature of the sound used by our Neolithic ancestors in sacred sites, and he touched upon his discovery that 110 Hz is a common resonant frequency in sacred places. A quick search of YouTube and Spotify verifies that this is a frequency many associate with healing properties. This turned out to be a recurring idea whilst researching this episode.
First of all, we do know that certain sounds can have a healing effect on disturbed people. We can vary a lot depending on the disturbed person and on the sound and how it's transmitted. The 110 Hertz, we know, has a fundamental effect on, as I said, on the frontal cortex. We've not studied this, by the way, but it will have some sort of effect on how the person is feeling. we can't ignore here the use of psychedelics. Nearly all ancient shamanic cultures use some form of mind-changing substance. So most ritual use of sound was for trance, inducing trance.
The master musicians of Jujuka, they're a Sufi sect, essentially. They operate really as a musicians' guild. They've been operating since at least the 16th century, perhaps even longer than that, in the village of Jujuka, which is in the lower Rif Mountains in Morocco. And they produce kind of wild, deeply hypnotic sound, but the drone is central really to what they do through the use of rahisha pipes and chanting and so on. But talking about healing, I mean, the music they created is said to have the power to heal disturbed minds, and to this day people with mental health issues are sometimes brought to the village, and there's a long centuries old tradition of their music being used to restore some kind of equilibrium. And they've got a long tradition, festival of Boujalud. It's music to heal, it's music to celebrate, really, you know. But it's the drone is absolutely central within that, and the volume is unbelievably intense.
Harry Sword is a music journalist and author of Monolithic Undertow, a book that traces what he describes as the crooked path of the drone, an unbroken continuous sound evoking womb-like warmth or cavernous dread alike, from its Neolithic beginnings to Sufi music, Indian ragas, Buddhist chants, cone-shattering dubwise bass, space rock and cosmic jazz. That the drone has the potential to heal is rooted in many ancient cultures, from Aboriginal Australian didgeridoo music to the tambora or sitar of classical Indian culture.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's two foundational sounds that we have an affinity to from the womb, and that's the drone, which is the rushing of the maternal blood, and the 4/4 beat of the maternal heart. There was a study done where they measured the in utero volume, and it came out at something like 78 decibels, which is it's incredibly loud for the unborn baby. It's incredibly loud down there. And I think it's interesting, a lot of babies have an affinity to drone sounds. I mean, my kids wouldn't go to sleep for the first few months without a white noise generator, you know. I found that the most useful thing, you know. They're basically drone generators where you can put waves on, or you can put thunderstorm, but the one that seemed to work best was just this kind of white noise drone sound, you know. And it's basically a return to the womb, you know. It's a return to that stasis of the womb. And it's interesting. I mean, you know, as you track back, you find that, you know, pretty much every major religion has some kind of drone tradition. You know, if you think of Gregorian chant, if you think of the Om chant within Buddhism, you know, the concept of Nada Brahma in Hindu theology, the drone is central to so much of spiritual life. I think the best example of this is perhaps the Om chant, which for Buddhists and Hindus, it represents the oneness of everything, the everything of everything, if that makes sense.
Listen down into that sound. What is it? A current of air? Vibrating vocal cords? Your own eardrums? Something running in your head? It's all of these, but go still deeper.
I interviewed a guy called Devereux Singh. He's a master sitarist, and I asked him to explain the significance of the Om in traditional Indian classical music. And he said the following. He said, you need to understand the concept of creation in order to understand the drone and its significance. Indian thinking is rooted in the idea of the one manifested in the many, the totality of white light refracting into colours, colours refracting back into white light. That is the significance. Non-duality, the whole of creation is the same thing. Om is the representation of the one. The whole bedrock of creation is in sound, the concept of Nada Brahma. Om is the significance. Whatever we do, music, medicine, anything, we never forget the basic facts. Everything is interconnected. What is the spiritual effect? You never forget that you are coming from the one. That's the significance, really, of the drone within traditional Indian music. It's the bedrock of creation. If we look at other traditions, say Gregorian chant, in the Greek Orthodox Church, there's a drone tradition. There's a bass note known as the eson, which is there as a kind of bedrock atop which the melody is built. So it's really the bedrock, often, of spiritual practice in terms of music.
So might listening to drones be healing or soothing because it reconnects us with the oneness of everything? Or could it be a comforting reminder of the womb? Or both? Or neither? Recently, I was invited to a gong performance in Brighton by musician and producer Simon Janes. It was a sold-out performance for 3 at Simon's tiny studio, laying on the floor covered in blankets for an hour, our eyes closed as Simon merged rolling gongs with soft electronica. I'd had a few experiences of drone music like this before and always found it to be really powerful, meditative and nourishing, a massage for the soul. I asked Harry if he had a go-to drone album or artist for calming the mind. Initially he said Hawkwind, but I pretended he hadn't, and when pressed further he also mentioned Eliana Radig, whose name will come up a few times during this episode.
While I was writing the book, the last few chapters, I got a really nasty dose of COVID kind of when it was first here in sort of March, but quite unpleasantly ill for a month.
Yeah.
Like, it was pretty grim. And I was due to submit the manuscript, and I couldn't do anything for a month. So the last few chapters were kind of written in a kind of the kind of haze of kind of post-viral illness. But I did actually write the last few chapters. I'd had a kind of ritual where I'd put on Eliana Radigay, triptych generally, on my headphones and write in the evening, and then I'd almost always fall asleep because it's so soporific, you know, if I want to kind of put myself down, as it were, yeah, there's no better artist really.
I'd been meditating for many, many years, and I started meditating and then listening to kind of drone music as well. There seemed to be something quite powerful within just the long one single note that changes slightly over long periods. And there's a track by Eliane Radig, who's this French electronic music operator who kind of worked with a lot of French experimental musicians in the 60s, and in the 70s she had this great enormous ARP 250 machine that she'd make these massive drones on and then cut all the tapes together and take about a year to make each piece, I think, and nothing much happened but over a very, very long period of time. So you kind of had a different time and space, it felt, when you listened to this music, and I was kind of meditating and listening to it at the same time, and I realized that when I was doing the mantra for meditation and listening to the music, it was quite strong, but after a while I stopped doing the mantra and just listened to the music, and it seemed like an even stronger meditation. It was kind of like a much deeper way of listening.
I do listen to the Trilogy de l'Amour sometimes when I'm working because I find just the kind of slightly shifting drones calm me down. And you do think, is this because it reminds you of, the way you heard music in the womb, these distant, slightly unchanging sounds. And obviously I can't check because I can't go back there. But yeah, I did. I go into an office sometimes to work because I don't like being at home all the time. I like to have that distinction of workplace and home environment. But when I do, there'll be people around me having meetings about whatever on their headphones, and there'll be me listening to Trilogy de l'Amour.
Music journalist Jude Rogers there, who we also met in an earlier episode. Richard Norris is a musician and record producer who has created music ranging from dance to psych to folk and pretty much everything in between. Having returned to London from Lewis a few years before the pandemic, Richard and his partner came to realise they'd moved into a troubled neighbourhood. Needing a safe space to retreat to, Richard decided to do it sonically, leading to his Music for Healing series of albums, driven, you guessed it, by drone.
Every time I opened the door in the morning, 4 people would actually fall into the flat and start shouting at us. And there was a point when I was surrounded by 10 guys at one night, all kind of prodding me. So it didn't feel very nice. So we kind of thought, well, we need to create a kind of safe space. And, you know, most of the time I'm in the studio. So I thought, right, I'm going to make this the safe space. But I thought, well, I'll just make a safe sort of landscape. So I started making this very, very slow music. And it's all about sort of 60 BPM, if you can even hear a BPM, because it's mainly not... hasn't got any drums on it, to put me in a slightly less anxious state of mind, really. And it kind of worked. I sort of started writing more and more pieces, and then we had the lockdown, and at that point I think, well, maybe it's helped me with anxiety and stress, so maybe it'll help other people. So I started putting them up on Bandcamp every week in the first lockdown. I think the first one was 12 weeks, I think, so I put one up every week and just got loads of feedback. It was just one of those things where people just started emailing and messaging and writing in and just saying that it helped them with bereavement, and it helped them with anxiety and depression. And someone said that they'd given birth to the music, and it was just an amazing sort of feeling of having a kind of music that had a purpose, that was sort of something beyond that, and something beyond just making a nice piece of music. It was actually, you could feel that people were kind of listening to it and interacting with it in a different way. Because of that, I've just done it every month since, which is so I put out a 20-minute piece every month. I think there's definitely something about slow music and drone. It seems very sort of instant, but also kind of ancient as well.
Richard and I talk about the stories we've heard of the alleged healing power of specific frequencies, 110 or 111 Hz being a favourite, and known by some as the divine frequency. Richard tells me about research with 40 Hz, equivalent to a low E flat.
There's a guy called Dr. Lee Bartell who's done lots of research on that, and it's the kind of the same frequency or same amount of cycles per second that the neurons are firing in your brain when it's kind of working in a kind of waking state. And neurons that wire together fire together, he said, something like that. The idea is that there can be some kind of entrainment. So in just the same way that when you're walking past Topshop and the disco record comes on, you instantly lock into the BPM. The theory is that the same kind of thing will happen in your brain.
Dr. Lee Bartle is the founding director of Music and Health Research Collaboratory at Toronto University. In his TED Talk, he recounts his discovery that a low-frequency pitch of pure tone at 40 Hz can stimulate cells in the body in a positive way. Neurons like to connect at 40 Hz. When they're not connecting, bad things happen and can in time lead to dementia or Alzheimer's. Bartle claims to have had remarkable results giving sound stimulation to sufferers for 30 minutes per day per week. He also claims promising results with pain reduction for those suffering fibromyalgia and reduced impact of strokes and heart failure. And unlike pill-based medicine, there's no side effects to sound therapy, and treatment just requires a set of headphones and an app. Or as Bartle himself puts it,
I could not have foreseen that stimulating cells with sound can reduce the risk and impact of health problems like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and fibromyalgia and depression. But what I do foresee now in the not too distant future is that when a doctor encounters something like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or depression, they might take out their prescription pads and write a prescription for sound stimulation. And that's music medicine at the cellular level.
So you'll be sitting here, so I have to read you a bit of a script first. This experiment is likely to last around an hour and 15 minutes from start to finish. First, we're going to connect you to some equipment that will measure your heart rate and pulse. None of these sensors will affect you in any way, as they're only taking measurements. I'm going to need to place some sensors here and here and here for the heart rate data.
I'm in the Psychophysics lab in the Trafford Centre in Sussex University, about to do a sound experiment with someone else exploring the physical effects of sound on the body and mind, musician and doctoral researcher Fiona Miller. Fiona is exploring sound as a potential tool for improving our ability to self-regulate and manage arousal and therefore our emotions. The broad spectrum of frequencies she's testing run from 0 to 2000 Hz, all comfortably heard with the human ear. All are made into a microtonal composition that drifts between tones, using Fiona's own voice and the reverberation of a single guitar sound.
On your left-hand side and kind of just above, just below your rib in the soft space.
Okay. My heart is wired up to an ECG, measuring not just variations in pulse, but also the fluctuations in the interbeat variance of the heart, what happens between heartbeats, which is called heart rate variability and is a reliable biomarker for predicting health and well-being. Afterwards, Fiona interviews me in depth to understand how the music made me feel and what it looked like. She even reflects back my gestures as I talk about the sounds.
That feeling, and also how you describe it, kind of try and tackle what is unease from different places. And you talk about this tightness, and you mentioned to begin with is in the chest, and if it was more extreme when you've had this experience before, it might move.
Later on, Fiona talks about how sound and music are active agents within a psychedelic experience. Sounds can seriously destabilise our emotions during a trip. Once, when I was on ayahuasca, some numpty put on the 1812 overture. Within 5 minutes, I was witnessing a terrifyingly real and bloody battle going on in the living room. Much better, had it been available then, would have been John Hopkins' album Music for Psychedelic Therapy, designed to soothe emotions whilst tripping. Without the use of stimulants, our response to music may be more nuanced, but it still affects our emotions.
I suppose in a naive sense, in a very hopeful sense, I would love to work more with the idea of using sound as a space to help people to engage with their emotions and learn more about the way that they feel and where those feelings come from. I don't dislike the kind of science of people's experiences with these specific frequency ranges. I think that, and I've experienced crazy things within sound healing environments to specific tune forks and gongs and resonant frequencies. I absolutely have. But I just don't know how much we can compare that between each other. Like, I have a specific frequency that I listen to concentrate on my work as a YouTube, like, super stupid thing with a title that says something like heal the part, I'm not someone that's against thinking in that way, and certainly I would love to be able to have more opportunities to draw upon the history of sound healing and some of the shamanic practices that use sound.
Fiona likes to think of sound as a playground for exploring our emotions, which is why it's important to understand which sounds are active agents in affecting our arousal mechanisms. Evidence, however, suggests that we don't universally experience frequencies in the same way. What is emerging from the experiments is the way we construct our own experience of music, in that we each have a unique reaction to music, which is not universal, and something that we create based upon our physiological state, our past experiences, and how we categorize our sensorial and cognitive reactions to our existing experience. As research for this episode deepened, thanks to Jude, Harry and Richard, I immersed myself in Eliana Radige's Trilogie de l'amour and Norris's Music for Healing as a form of meditation. I found a 110 Hz contact frequency playlist on Spotify that had a calming effect on me, a bit like the music you sometimes get when you go for a massage, without the cheesy panpipes. John Hopkins' music for psychedelic therapy I found powerful too, a dreamy, sparkly wash of sounds. There's something nourishing and warming about being immersed in these slow drones. As someone who suffers claustrophobia and hates going in lifts and on the tube, these are the sounds I now reach for when in closed spaces and am beginning to feel overcome with the all too familiar racing heart and clammy hands. As Fiona suggests, I'm constructing an experience of sound in an attempt to self-regulate my emotions. Up until now, we've been looking at different types of sounds and vibrations and how they can affect our well-being. But what of new ways of experiencing music? We know that profoundly deaf people can experience music as vibration in the body. Do those of us who can hear only experience sound through our ears? Colombian sound artist David Velez is interested in different ways of listening. In his studio in Huddersfield, I was given noise-cancelling headphones and instructed to rest my chin on a metre-high drum wrapped in astroturf, through which specially composed music was being transmitted. The sound was coming directly through my chin, and later, via an inflatable headdress like the ones you take on a plane, through my spinal column and neck. It was extraordinary. I'll let David explain.
This is focused on the back of your skull, and this is focused on your chin, which both are really sensitive to sound. So what you have here is a transducer that brings sound to all the surface, and what you have here is a very basic pillow, neck pillow they use for traveling, but I adapted it and I have a couple of transducers here, so you will be able to listen with this piece to the back of your skull and to this piece through your chin. And something interesting is that for this particular piece I studied the resonance of the mouth, so you can change the pitch of what you hear if you move your mouth, because you are changing how the sound propagates into your mouth. We usually associate sound traveling airwave, but sound can travel through water, sound can travel to solids, even to plasma, and transduction is the technology that allows. So what you will hear here is how sound is coming from this body through your head.
Next, experiencing music through my spine and neck via the inflatable pillow felt like ASMR, that tingle some of us get across the head when someone is whispering in your ear whilst giving you a haircut, or if you're a bit weird, your accountant breathily crunching numbers. David, that was such a unique experience to feel music through the chin, through the head, not through the ears, and to be able to play with the sounds. It almost felt like a massage at times. The vibrations within the chin and the head was really very pleasurable.
As you explain it, I'm very happy, because that's exactly what I want with this artwork, is to experience our body and sound differently, and experience sound differently through our body, and experience our body differently to sound.
Afterwards, David takes me to a woodland stream near his house, where he recorded some of the sounds for his installations. Here, our theme shifts again from different types of sounds and different ways of experiencing sounds to a very different kind of listener, the vegetable world. I asked David about his work and interest in the relationship between plants and music, and whether he believes that sound can have a healing or harmful effect on our vegetable cousins.
Well, my interest with plants started relatively recent. It was in 2019 when I was doing my PhD, and I met Elena Villamil. She's a horticulturist, she's a cook, and I developed a project with her about chicha, which is a beverage that is brewed from mice that has a small level of alcohol.
Yes, you did hear that right. Booze made from mice. In fact, I've sampled it. More than sampled it. I got rat-arsed on it. Sorry about that. Inspired by Elena, David became intrigued about plants, notably beetroot. Invited to grow beetroot in the dark as part of an art installation, David developed light and sound frequencies to help the plants grow. The choice of sounds grew from David growing beetroot at home and measuring their success in relation to the sound. Why beetroot?
Because I really like beetroot.
Fair enough.
The results were very positive. The plants grew very well. Actually, we had a workshop with Elena in which we tried the beetroot. She claimed that the flavor was particularly sweet. Definitely we were able to grow healthy beetroots with a combination of sine tones. Of course, this combination of sine tones are made scientifically. I researched previous studies on bio-acoustic on which frequencies are positive for plants. The high range between 1,000 and 6,000 hertz is very positive for a lot of plants. So I created a composition using sine tones in that range. The result was really positive. The plants grew great, but most important for me, they grew tasty. We'll have them tastier without the sound, we will never know. But what I can guarantee is, like, if you play the CD to your plants, it won't harm them, and it might create like a positive impact. I call this area of knowledge applied by acoustics, or the research shows that, for instance, plants don't like noisy sounds, like sounds like white noise. Plants don't like, and can actually harm them if the exposure is long and the intensity is very strong. There's a story of research with tomato and tobacco that the plants, after 2 or 3 weeks of exposure to white noise, they stopped growing, or actually they died. There's research also that was done in the 50s that the roots of a plant, that they have an experiment in which they have one plant listening to soft pop music and orchestral music, and the other was being exposed to heavy metal and loud rock. And the plant that was exposed to loud rock, the roots grow against the sound. The plant that was growing very close to the more melodic and soft music like pop, and the roots grow towards the sound. So those are the beginnings of bioacoustics. So what I did is I did a whole review of the research that was done since the 1920s until now, and the literature shows that the frequencies that are more beneficial to them are all above 1,000 hertz. So that's the reason, because when you work with plants or any kind of living entities, you have to be really responsible. So in a way, I couldn't not have my beetroots to die, because the exhibition will fail and my process will fail. So I took a safe bet, and I just work with sound that has been already proven. Of course, I gathered research from different projects, from different researchers, and the result was very positive.
So if you're throwing a heavy metal party at home, spare a thought for your poor houseplants. If it feels like we've drifted away somewhat from this episode's core theme of exploring specific frequencies, timbres and drones for healing, David and I concluded our conversation talking about the potential power of sine waves, or pure tones. If you don't know what a sine wave is, you'll recognise it as a pure synthesised tone used in hearing tests, for example, and is visually represented as a perfectly curved wave and trough. These are elemental units of sound, and they don't exist in nature, because all natural sounds are complex layers of many different sine tones. But this makes them uniquely useful. And of course, they're also drones.
If you take any sound, a tree falling, a jet engine, that sound can be studied on approach as a combination of sine waves happening. Why sine waves are so important in medicine, or in bioacoustics, or in general in scientific research? Because their exactitude allows you to test how a certain body or how a certain organism reacts to that exact amount of vibration. But there's a formula in which you take the form of the leaf of a certain plant, and with that formula you create a sine tone. That sine tone will help that plant to breathe better, because exactly that level of vibration in that exact frequency cleans the surface of the plant and allows it to breathe. So that explains why sine tones are so helpful, because all the bodies react different to different resonances or to different vibration. And with sine tones, you have the capacity to check exactly which is the sound that is stimulating a certain response on the organism or the object or the body, or however you're calling it.
Jaws harp? Anybody? So it seems that drones don't just stimulate us, but can stimulate nature too. And if all sound is made up of sine tones, with sufficient research, might they hold the key to specific types of healing and nurturing for both humans and flora, and presumably fauna too? In his book Monolithic Undertow, Harry Sword describes the drone as a psychedelic talisman, a loosening of the grip of time. It limits the constant of change and striving for something. The drone, he writes, is not radio-friendly or commercial. Do we play it, or does it play us? He concludes. Harry also reminds us that not all drones are welcome. They can be bad medicine. Our houses hum with low-volume, high-frequency drones of fridges, hi-fis, TVs and modems. He writes about how high-frequency drones can be triggering for those who have experienced drone warfare. And for those of us suffering with tinnitus, its constant high whine can even make silence an unwelcoming space. But as we're nearly at the end of this episode, let's not end on a sobering note. Let's conclude with both the ridiculous and the sublime, the healing power of badly played music, and a long-established myth of a drone with a rather unique superpower. Here's Harry Sword on a topic hotly debated by musicologists for decades, the mythical brown note.
Mythical brown note is supposedly it's a frequency that can induce involuntary defecation in those to whom it is directed toward. If anyone doesn't know the kind of history of Hawkwind's drone tradition, there was a guy called Dick Mick who basically had a selection of ring modulators, and it was said, probably complete bollocks, but it was said that he could induce defecation at will by twisting certain frequencies. I don't actually believe that. The University of Dub used to do immense kind of sound clashes at Brixton Recreational Centre in the mid-noughties, and it was King Earthquake versus Iration Steppers, and it was just ludicrous volume. I've never to this day experienced anything like that. And there was a guy in front of me, and he was rolling a spliff, and all of a sudden this dub dropped. The bass line kicked in, and it actually blew the contents of his spliff onto the guy in front of his head. It was that's the kind of volume. It was ridiculous. So that was kind of perhaps fairly close to the brown note.
And for those not into drones, badly played music might just be the tonic you need to cheer you up.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, where would we be without good music? Here.
Les Dawson's deliberately bad piano playing in the 80s always made me howl as a kid. Such playing does ironically require quite a lot of skill. The same can't be said for the Portsmouth Sinfonia, a DIY punk orchestra that bookended the 70s and comprised of people who really couldn't play their instruments, including Brian Eno on clarinet. Their version of Also Sprach Zarathustra is the perfect tonic for me if I'm feeling blue, and need a quick fix. In offering a wealth of nourishment for the ears in this episode, it's important to acknowledge all the musicians whose work has been featured. We heard from the beginning an unreleased drone track by Oddfellows Casino, the master musicians of Jujuka, Simon Jane's Gong Libre Full Moon, Eliana Radig's Trilogie de l'amour, Richard Norris's Ultramarine from Music for Healing Colours LP, Fiona Miller's non-vocalised instrumental piece, Two from David Velez, Les Dawson, and the Portsmouth Symphonia's truly dreadful rendition of Also Sprach Zarathustra. The music of Fiona Miller, Richard Norris, Oddfellows Casino, Simon Janes and David Velez can be found on Bandcamp and is well worth exploring and supporting. I'd also recommend a free 28-hour drone playlist by Harry Sword, available on Spotify under the name Monolithic Undertow. And finally, having now spent 45 minutes immersed in and exploring drones and other sounds and their effects on us, it's worth remembering that John and Yoko's proposed national anthem to Nutopia was in fact 4 seconds of silence.
Have some chips.
Shh! What are you doing here? Get back to Series 1. Adventures in Nutopia was produced and presented by me, David Bramwell, with music from Oddfellows Casino. For more info, go to drbramwell.com or contact me on Twitter @DrBramwell. Huge thanks to all of my guests in this episode and for the support of Hawkwood College. The idea of Nutopia was established by John and Yoko in 1973 as a place with no boundaries and whose international anthem is silence. Gratitude and support to our friends at Journey to Nutopia for their role in our provenance. This podcast is made possible by the generous sponsorship of Druids. What, you say? What, the award-winning international folk band from County Kildare? No. Oh, the 70s prog rock band from Berkhamsted who once appeared on the Old Grey Whistle Test? No. The contemporary Iowa-based metal band whose albums include Cycles of Mobium and Spirit Compass? No. Genuine Druids. These are people from all walks of life who have a shared love and respect for the natural world and celebrate 8 special festival times during the year. People who work to develop their creativity, to foster community and compassion, and to study spiritual teachings that draw their inspirations from the natural world. People who are interested in meditation, mysticism and magic as means to improve their lives and the lives of others. People who are often engaged in projects to preserve, protect and restore the natural world and celebrate the creative arts. Do you get to wear cool robes and carry a staff? You can if you want, it isn't compulsory. Interested? Find out more at druidry.org.